There is a plant that grows in ditches, along roadsides, in forgotten corners of North America. For 2,500 years, its milky sap relieved pain when nothing else could. Surgeons carried it into Civil War field hospitals when morphine supplies ran dry. Polish doctors prescribed it when opium killed more patients than it saved. Pharmacists sold it in every drugstore across America until 1944. Then it vanished. Not because it failed, because it succeeded without profit. A painkiller you cannot patent. A sedative that grows without permission. Medicine that asks for no prescription, no refill, no recurring revenue. The pharmaceutical industry built an $80 billion empire on synthetic pain relief. And this plant, which relieved suffering for millennia, was buried beneath it. This is wild lettuce, the painkiller they erased. Welcome to nature's lost vault. The archive opens in ancient Egypt, 1550 BCE. Inside the Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest medical documents ever discovered, scribes recorded a plant they called lettuce of the gods. Its milky sap drove away pain and brought sleep. Greek physician Dioscorides documented it in 77 CE. He called it lactuca virosa, the bitter lettuce. The name itself reveals its secret. Lactuca comes from the Latin for milk. Virosa means potent. When you cut the stem, white sap bleeds out like tears from a wound. This is lactucarium. When dried, it hardens into a brown resin that looks very much like crude opium. Ancient physicians called it lettuce opium because of what it could do. It could relieve pain, calm coughs, and bring sleep. All without the chains of addiction. The plant itself stands defiant, 6 feet tall, crowned with small yellow flowers. Green stems are sometimes spotted purple. Leaves are jagged with spines running down the central vein. Every part contains the medicine, but the sap holds the power. Romans used it to treat everything from insomnia to battlefield wounds. For centuries it was simply understood. Pain existed, and this plant, growing wild across Europe and Asia, answered it. By 1799, lactucarium reached the United States. Doctors prescribed it. Pharmacists sold it in tinctures and lozenges. It sat on shelves beside laudanum and morphine as one more tool against suffering. Then, in 1861, everything changed. The American Civil War erupted. Within months, Union Army medical supplies faced catastrophe. The Union alone issued nearly 10 million opium pills to its soldiers, plus 2.8 million ounces of opium powders and tinctures. But Confederate forces had almost none. The Union blockade strangled Southern supply lines. By 1862, Confederate field hospitals ran out of morphine entirely. Surgeons amputated limbs without anesthesia. Soldiers died screaming. Desperate doctors turned to what grew free. Wild lettuce thrived across roadsides and riverbanks throughout the South. Confederate surgeons harvested it themselves, cutting stems, collecting the milky sap, and drying it into a brown resin. It worked. Not as powerful as morphine, but it dulled the unbearable. It allowed surgeries. It gave dying men enough peace to close their eyes. Medical staff documented it in field reports. When liquid opium became scarce, lactucarium provided essential relief. One Confederate surgeon wrote that wild lettuce kept more soldiers alive than any other substitute remedy they found. The North watched. When the war ended in 1865, American doctors had learned something critical. Opium addiction was destroying thousands of veterans. The hypodermic needle was introduced in 1856 and used widely by the 1870s, and it had created an epidemic. By 1895, 1 in every 200 Americans was addicted to opiates. But wild lettuce showed no such curse. In the 1870s, Polish physicians began methodical studies. They had access to both opium and wild lettuce. They tested them side by side on patients suffering chronic pain, coughs, and insomnia. The results, published in multiple 19th-century Polish medical journals, were remarkable. One physician wrote that the action of lactucarium was weaker than that of opium, but free of the side effects. Medical practice showed that in some cases, lactucarium produced better curative effects than opium. No addiction, no respiratory depression, no euphoria that enslaved patients to the needle. By 1898, the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official compendium of approved medicines, listed wild lettuce alongside morphine and aspirin. It was standardized, tested, official. In 1911, the British Pharmaceutical Codex added it for use in lozenges, tinctures, and syrups as a sedative for irritable cough or as a mild hypnotic for insomnia. The Serval Company's 1917 medicinal plant catalogue called it highly esteemed to quiet coughing and allay nervous irritation, a good safe remedy to produce sleep, to be used when opium and other narcotics are objectionable. This was written when opium and cocaine were still sold over the counter. Wild lettuce was not a folk remedy. It was official medicine. Doctors prescribed it. Pharmacists stocked it. Patients trusted it. Then the industry shifted beneath it. The 1930s through the 1960s birthed the pharmaceutical golden age. Penicillin, sulfonamides, synthetic vitamins, antibiotics that cured tuberculosis and pneumonia for the first time in human history. But something else changed. The entire philosophy of drug discovery. Pharmaceutical companies shifted from natural products to synthetic chemistry. New laboratories abandoned beakers of plant extracts for molecular models and X-ray crystallography. Chemists learned to build molecules from scratch. Aspirin was synthesized in 1899, barbiturates appeared in 1901, and eventually Tylenol in 1955. The advantage was control. A synthetic molecule could be patented, marketed, priced, and protected. Every bottle sold generated profit for decades. Natural medicines could not. Wild lettuce grew free. Anyone could harvest it. No patent, no exclusive rights, no recurring revenue model. By the 1940s, the FDA expanded its authority. The Insulin Amendment of 1941 required all batches of insulin to be tested for purity before marketing. The Penicillin Amendment of 1945 did the same for antibiotics. Regulation tightened, and standardization became law. Wild lettuce faced a new barrier. To remain in the pharmacopoeia, it needed clinical trials, multi-phase testing, and millions of dollars in research. Who would fund that? You cannot patent a plant that grows wild. There was no financial incentive to prove what centuries already knew. In 1944, researcher Fulton published what amounted to a death sentence. Modern medicine considered its sleep-producing qualities a superstition, and its therapeutic action doubtful or nil. Never mind that it had relieved pain for 2,500 years. Never mind that Civil War surgeons used it when morphine ran out. Never mind that Polish doctors documented its safety. The study claimed commercial lactucarium preparations were without effect. Later research revealed why. The active compounds lactucin and lactucopicrin are unstable. They degrade in old preparations. Fresh lactucarium worked. Shelf-stable commercial products did not. But the damage was done. Wild lettuce fell from the pharmacopoeia. Doctors stopped prescribing it. Pharmacies stopped stocking it. A generation of physicians trained after 1950 never learned it existed. What rose in its place was an empire worth billions. The global pain relief market reached $80 billion by 2023. Over-the-counter analgesics alone generate $30 billion annually. Aspirin dominates. Approximately 60 billion aspirin tablets are consumed worldwide each year. Americans alone ingest 34 billion. 1 trillion aspirin tablets were taken in the past century. Big Pharma built fortunes on molecules it could patent. Ibuprofen, acetaminophen, naproxen, each one protected by intellectual property law, each one sold at controlled prices, each one requiring purchase. Again and again. The genius was creating need. Pain exists. Everyone suffers at some point. Headaches, arthritis, back pain, surgical recovery. The pharmaceutical industry promised relief. For a price, $20 for a bottle of Advil, $15 for Tylenol. Multiply that by 8 billion people, recurring monthly. Companies like Bayer, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, and GlaxoSmithKline built empires on this model. Marketing budgets in the billions. Lobbyists in Washington. Direct-to-consumer advertising that tells you to ask your doctor. But there was always a problem. Side effects. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen cause stomach ulcers and bleeding. Acetaminophen damages livers at high doses. Opioids, the most effective painkillers, created the addiction crisis, still killing 100,000 Americans per year. The search for alternatives drove research. CBD oil, turmeric, medical marijuana. Billions invested in finding non-addictive pain relief. Yet wild lettuce, proven non-addictive for 2,500 years, remained forgotten. Then, in the 1970s, something unexpected happened. The counterculture discovered it. Young people seeking legal alternatives to controlled substances found references in old herbals. Lettuce opium. They brewed teas. They smoked dried leaves. They mixed it with catnip and damiana. It was weak compared to marijuana, but it was legal. The Food and Drug Administration had never scheduled it. This brought attention, not from doctors, but from researchers. In 2005, scientists at the University of Arizona tested lactucin and lactucopicrin, the active compounds, on mice. At doses of 30 milligrams per kilogram, they produced pain relief comparable to ibuprofen. A 2021 study confirmed the mechanism. Lactucin acts as an adenosine receptor agonist. It calms nerve signals without triggering opioid receptors. No addiction pathway, no respiratory depression. The compounds also inhibit acetylcholinesterase, the same target as some Alzheimer's medications. Wild lettuce does not just dull pain, it may protect cognitive function. Today you can buy wild lettuce tinctures online, dried leaves in health stores, and capsules marketed as a natural sleep aid. Prices range from $15 to $30 per bottle. But there is a problem. Quality varies wildly. There is no FDA oversight and no standardization. Some products contain barely any lactucarium. Others are mislabeled entirely, with prickly lettuce sold as wild lettuce, though the compounds differ. Fresh lactucarium works when harvested correctly and used properly. But the knowledge of how to extract it, dry it, and dose it was lost when the last generation of pharmacists who stocked it died. The pharmaceutical industry did not set out to erase wild lettuce. They built a system where it could not compete. Patents favor synthetic molecules. Clinical trials cost millions of dollars. FDA approval requires corporate funding. Insurance reimburses brand-name drugs, but not wild plants. The result is the same. A painkiller used for 2,500 years vanished, not because it failed, but because it succeeded without generating revenue. 75 million Americans suffer chronic pain. 20% of adults worldwide suffer chronic pain. The pain management industry projects $120 billion by 2033. And a plant growing in ditches, requiring no prescription, no refill, no patent, no profit, sits forgotten. Wild lettuce never left. It still grows along roadsides from California to Massachusetts, on riverbanks across Europe, and in waste ground in Iran, Austria, France, Germany, and Scotland. You can identify it if you know what to look for: a tall stem, sometimes purple-spotted, jagged leaves with spines along the center vein, and small yellow flowers. Cut the stem and white sap bleeds out. The harvest method is simple. Cut stems in late summer when the sap runs thick. Collect the latex on plates or directly into alcohol. Dry it into a brown resin or preserve it in a tincture. Fresh extraction works best because the compounds degrade in old commercial products. Herbalists still teach it. Foragers still harvest it. Small companies still sell it. The FDA never scheduled it. It remains legal to grow, possess, and use. But the medical establishment largely ignores it. Medical schools do not teach it. Doctors do not prescribe it. Pharmacies do not stock it. Insurance will not cover it. The knowledge exists in the margins. Survival blogs, homesteading forums, herbal medicine books, people who remember what their grandparents knew, and people who refuse to forget. This is what they tried to bury. Not just a plant, but the idea that relief can grow free. That medicine does not require corporations, and that knowledge can pass from hand to hand without a profit motive. The pharmaceutical industry will tell you wild lettuce is unreliable, unstandardized, and potentially dangerous. They will say modern medicine moved beyond crude plant extracts to precise synthetic molecules. They will not tell you that 25% of current pharmaceuticals are still based on plant-derived compounds. They will not tell you that morphine, still prescribed daily, comes from opium poppies. They will not tell you that aspirin was originally willow bark. They will not tell you that wild lettuce worked for 2,500 years before they decided it did not. The plant waits, in ditches, along roads, in forgotten corners where no one thinks to look. It does not need approval. It does not need marketing. It just grows. It waits for hands willing to cut the stem and collect the milk. It waits for knowledge to flow again. If this vault opened something for you, subscribe to Nature's Lost Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon.